It was a cool autumn evening when Daniel drove home from his construction job. The road was empty, and the sky had turned a soft shade of orange. Daniel liked this quiet time. He lived alone in a small house outside the city. It was peaceful, but sometimes too quiet. Ever since his dog Max passed away 2 years ago, he had missed the sound of paws on the wooden floor and the wag of a tail waiting by the door. As he drove past the edge of a dense forest, something caught his eye, a small bundle of fur lying by the roadside. He slowed down and turned on his hazard lights. As he stepped out of his truck and walked closer, he realized it was a puppy, a German shepherd, or so it seemed. The puppy was shivering and covered in mud. It looked hungry and scared, with big, intelligent eyes. Daniel crouched down slowly and stretched out his hand. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. The pup didn't growl or bark. Instead, it took a shaky step forward and pressed its nose against Daniel's hand. Without thinking twice, Daniel scooped up the pup and placed it gently on the passenger seat. "You're coming home with me," he said with a grin. "You need a bath, some food, and a name. Bringing it home." Once home, Daniel gave the pup a warm bath. The dirt and grime washed off, revealing thick, dark fur. The dog's ears stood straight up, and its paws were surprisingly large for such a young pup. He wrapped the puppy in an old towel and sat on the floor next to it. "You're gonna grow up to be a big one, huh?" he said, chuckling. The pup looked at him with sharp, curious eyes. There was something different about those eyes. They looked too smart. Daniel didn't think much of it. He was just happy to have some company again. He made the pup a warm bowl of chicken and rice, and it gobbled up quickly. It didn't bark or make noise. It just watched Daniel calmly as it ate. "I think I'll call you Shadow," Daniel said, "because you follow me like one." That night, Shadow curled up at the foot of Daniel's bed and fell asleep instantly. Daniel, too, slept better than he had in months. Something's not quite right. Over the next few weeks, Shadow grew fast. Too fast. Within 1 month, he had doubled in size. His legs became long and muscular, his chest broad and powerful. His teeth were sharp, sharper than most puppies. Even his bark was strange. It was deeper, more like a growl or a rumble from deep inside his chest. The neighbors started noticing, too. One day, Daniel was walking Shadow when old Mr. Jenkins from down the road stopped him. "That's no normal dog," Mr. Jenkins said, squinting. "Looks more like a wolf to me." Daniel laughed. "He's just a big German shepherd. Found him on the side of the road." Mr. Jenkins nodded slowly. "Maybe so, but watch him close." Shadow didn't act like a regular dog. He never chased squirrels or barked at passing cars. He didn't like toys or bones. But he listened to Daniel. Always. He followed every command perfectly. Too perfectly. Sometimes at night, Daniel would wake up and find Shadow sitting by the window, staring out into the woods. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. Just watched. The first sign of trouble. One morning, Daniel walked outside to find something strange. His trash can have been knocked over, but it wasn't raccoons or possums that did it. Whatever was its sharp claws, it left deep scratches in the metal. At first, Daniel thought maybe Shadow had done it. But when he checked the backyard camera, he saw something else. A shadowy figure, large and fast, moving near the edge of the trees. It wasn't clear, but it didn't move like a dog or a coyote. Later that day, Shadow found a dead rabbit and dropped it at Daniel's feet. But the way he looked while holding it wasn't playful. His eyes locked onto Daniel's, as if saying, "I did this for you." Daniel started feeling uneasy. He began reading online forums about large dog breeds. He posted pictures of Shadow and asked if it was normal for a German shepherd to grow that quickly. Some replies said yes. Others weren't so sure. One message stood out. It was from a user named ForestWatcher89. It said, "That's not a German shepherd. Be careful. Some animals pretend to be something they're not." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Then he looked at Shadow, sleeping peacefully on the living room rug. His chest rose and fell slowly. He looked like any other big, loyal dog. But still, secrets in the forest. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He got up around 2 a.m. and saw that Shadow was in the house. The front door was slightly open. Daniel's heart raced. He grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The forest behind his house was dark and quiet. The air was cold. He called Shadow's name, but there was no answer, just the sound of wind in the trees. Then he heard it, a deep, low growl, not from in front of him, but behind. He turned slowly. There stood Shadow, but something was different. His eyes glowed faintly in the light. His shoulders were broader than before. He looked taller, and his back legs looked more like a wild animal's than a dog's. Shadow didn't attack. He just stared at Daniel. Then, without a sound, he turned and ran back into the trees. Daniel stood frozen in place, holding his flashlight tight in his hand. His heart was pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Shadow had always been different, but what he just saw wasn't just strange, it was frightening. He had raised that creature from a puppy, but now it was clear that Shadow wasn't a normal dog. Still, Daniel couldn't bring himself to think badly of him. He remembered the first night they met, how cold and scared the little creature had looked. Whatever Shadow was now, he had once been a helpless pup in need. Daniel didn't want to give up on him. The next morning, Daniel checked the woods behind his house. There were no paw prints, at least not any normal ones. The ground was marked by large, odd-shaped impressions, as if something half-dog, half-wild beast had passed through. He followed the trail a short distance before it disappeared near a fallen tree. He called for Shadow again, but there was no answer. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Days passed. Shadow didn't return. Daniel started to feel empty again, like the first time he lost Max. He missed the way Shadow used to sit silently by his side, the way he followed Daniel from room to room, always watching, always present. He still didn't understand what Shadow was, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that Shadow had cared about him, maybe even loved him. Just when Daniel had nearly lost hope, Shadow came back. It was early morning, and Daniel was making coffee when he heard the familiar sound of claws tapping on the wooden floor. He turned around, and there he was, bigger than before, but calm. Shadow's eyes met his, and for a moment they shared a quiet understanding. Daniel knelt down slowly, unsure what to expect. But Shadow walked to him, licked his hand, and sat beside him just like he always used to. Daniel didn't ask questions. He was just happy to have him home. But things didn't go back to normal. Shadow didn't sleep inside anymore. He stayed outside at night, always watching the woods. During the day, he was quiet and alert. It was like he was guarding something, or waiting for something to come. One evening, while fixing the fence in his backyard, Daniel noticed strange scratches on the trees near the forest line. Long, deep claw marks that hadn't been there before. He began to realize that Shadow might not have been the only strange creature in the woods. Maybe there were others like him. Maybe that's why he had disappeared, for protection or to warn them off. The next night, Daniel heard growling again. This time it wasn't just one voice, it was many. Shadow stood at the edge of the yard, growling low and steady. Daniel stood on the porch with a flashlight, trying to see what was out there. The growling grew louder, and in the darkness beyond the trees, yellow eyes blinked in the shadows. Shadow didn't run this time. He stood his ground. Then, to Daniel's shock, Shadow let out a howl long, deep, and chilling. It wasn't the howl of a dog. It echoed like something ancient and wild. The eyes in the trees backed away slowly and vanished into the dark. The forest fell quiet again. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with Shadow by his side, both of them staring at the trees, waiting. At sunrise, Shadow stood and walked into the woods again. This time, Daniel followed him. They moved quietly through the trees, deeper than Daniel had ever gone. After nearly an hour, they came to a clearing, and what Daniel saw there made him stop in his tracks. In the middle of the clearing stood a stone structure, old, broken, and covered in moss. It looked like it had been there for centuries. Around were claw marks, bones, and strange symbols scratched into the ground. Shadow walked to the center of the clearing and looked back at Daniel. For the first time, Daniel realized what this place was. It was a den, or maybe a temple, a place for creatures like Shadow. As he looked around, Daniel felt a strange energy in the air, not evil but powerful, wild, Shadow sat beside the old stones and tilted his head up. Then, out of nowhere, two other creatures stepped out from the trees. They looked like Shadow, tall, powerful, part wolf, part something else. They didn't attack. They just stood beside him, silent. Daniel finally understood. Shadow wasn't just different. He was special, part of something ancient and hidden, maybe a guardian, maybe a protector of this part of the forest. He had come to Daniel because he was young and alone, but now he had returned to his kind. Daniel didn't say anything. He slowly backed away, letting Shadow stay with the others. But before he turned to leave, Shadow walked up to him one last time. He pressed his forehead to Daniel's chest and stayed there for a few seconds. Then he turned and walked back into the clearing. Daniel left the forest quietly, heart heavy but filled with respect. He knew now that Shadow had never truly belonged in his world, but he had chosen to protect him, even when it put him in danger. Back at home, Daniel opened his laptop and began writing everything down. He wanted people to know, not to hunt or fear, but to understand. There were things in the world we didn't see, didn't know. Creatures that hid in the shadows, sometimes watching, sometimes protecting. And one of them had once lived in his home, curled up at the foot of his bed. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the place in the forest, the stone ruins of creatures and the way Shadow had stood among them. It all stayed in his mind. He spent hours online, searching for answers, myths, old stories, anything about animals that looked like dogs but weren't. He read about skinwalkers, werewolves, forest spirits, ancient protectors. None of it seemed real, yet what he had seen was real. He had touched it, lived with it. He didn't go back into the woods right away. He wanted to give Shadow space. But every morning, Daniel left food and water at the edge of the trees. Sometimes it would be gone the next day. Sometimes not. Days turned into weeks. The house felt quiet again. He missed the sound of paws, the low rumble of Shadow's breathing. Even with the mystery, even with the fear, Daniel still felt like Shadow was family. One night, Daniel heard a sound on his porch. He opened the door slowly, and there was Shadow, bigger than before, eyes calm but glowing faintly in the dark. He wasn't alone. Behind him were two more creatures, quiet and still. Daniel stood frozen, unsure what to do. Shadow stepped forward. He didn't enter the house, just looked up at Daniel, as if asking him to come. Daniel felt something pull at him, not fear, but trust. He grabbed his coat and followed them. They walked silently through the forest, deeper than before. Daniel didn't ask questions. He knew this wasn't just about Shadow anymore. They reached a new place, a circle of stones, older and large than the first. In the middle was something Daniel didn't expect, a man lying hurt on the ground. Shadow stood beside the man and looked at Daniel. It was clear they had brought him here for help. Daniel knelt beside the stranger. He had a deep cut on his leg and was breathing hard. He looked like he had been out there for days. Daniel checked his pulse. Alive. Weak, but alive. He turned to Shadow. You want me to help him, don't you? Shadow didn't answer, but his eyes said yes. Daniel carried the man out of the woods with Shadow close behind. It took hours, but they made it to his truck. He drove him to the hospital, told the staff he found him near his property. They asked no more questions. The man was treated, stabilized. He survived. Days later, Daniel visited the hospital. The man was awake. When Daniel asked what happened, the man only said, I got lost. Something found me. Something big. I thought I was done for. But it didn't hurt me. It brought me to safety. Daniel didn't say a word. He just nodded. Back at home, Shadow didn't come back. Not right away. But Daniel knew he was near. The food still disappeared. The scratches on trees stayed fresh. And sometimes late at night, he would see a pair of glowing eyes just past the trees, watching, guarding. One morning, Daniel found something new outside his door. Not food or tracks. Something carefully placed. A stick shaped like a carving. A symbol. Daniel didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a message. A thank you. That day, Daniel realized something important. He hadn't just rescued a creature that night on the road. He had been chosen. For what? He still wasn't sure. But it wasn't over. Winter rolled in quietly. Snow started to fall, covering the forest in white. Daniel's little house stood still under the cold sky, and though everything seemed silent, he didn't feel alone. The woods had changed ever since that night shadow returned. It felt like something was awake in the trees, but not in a bad way. It felt watched, yes, but also protected. Daniel began to see more signs. Carefully placed stones, bones arranged in patterns, symbols scratched into the bark. He knew they were from them, from Shadow and the others. He didn't disturb anything. He just left food, supplies, small offerings. In return, his home remained untouched. Even when other people nearby reported strange howls at night, broken fences, or missing livestock, Daniel's place was always safe. He hadn't seen Shadow face to face again, but he knew he was close. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel would sit on the porch with a mug of coffee, eyes fixed on the woods. On more than one occasion, he spotted those glowing eyes just between the trees. No movement, no sound, just presence. One night, the peace broke. Daniel woke to sirens. He stepped outside and saw red lights flashing far in the distance. A house on the next property over was burning. He rushed out to help, but by the time he got there, the fire had already taken most of it. No one was hurt, but the fire chief said it looked like something had started from outside. Some kind of wild animal had knocked over a propane tank. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat on the porch until sunrise, nervous, thinking maybe something had gone wrong with Shadow's pack. Maybe something else had come into the woods. The next day proved him right. On the edge of his backyard, he found tracks he hadn't seen before. Large, deep, like a bear's, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, and they came close, too close, to the house. He didn't wait. He grabbed a flashlight, a coat, and headed into the forest. He didn't call Shadow by name. He just whispered, "If you're there, I need your help." Hours passed. Snow fell harder. He followed the tracks until he reached a small clearing. That's where he saw it. Something big, hunched, with pale skin and glowing red eyes. It looked like a nightmare, something born from fear itself. It turned and hissed when it saw him, but didn't attack. Before it could move, Shadow appeared. He didn't come alone. Two more like him came from the shadows. The pale creature backed away, snarling, but Shadow stepped forward, growling low and steady. It was a warning, a command. There was a moment of stillness. Then the pale creature fled into the trees, fast and silent. Shadow didn't chase. He turned to Daniel instead, stepped close, and for the first time in weeks, they stood face to face. Daniel reached out and touched Shadow's head. He didn't need words. He just nodded. They understood each other. Shadow had come back not just to visit, but to protect. This was still his home, even if he lived in the wild now. And Daniel, he wasn't just a human anymore. He was part of something bigger. A bond. A secret. As the snow picked up, Shadow turned and vanished into the trees once more. Daniel walked home slowly, feeling the weight of what he'd seen, but not afraid. Back at the house, Daniel sat down at his desk. He started typing again. He wrote everything. Every sound, every night. Every strange moment that once seemed impossible, but now made sense. He didn't want to publish it. Not yet, but he wanted to remember. And maybe one day, someone else would find their own shadow and understand they weren't alone either. Months passed. Spring returned. The forest came alive with birds, flowers, and soft winds. The nights grew warmer. People stopped talking about the strange howls. The other creature, the pale one, never came back. One evening, as Daniel planted tomatoes in his backyard, he heard a low, soft bark. He turned. At the edge of the woods stood a smaller creature, not Shadow, but a pup. It had the same eyes, same thick fur, same silent confidence. Behind it, for just a second, he saw Shadow watching from the trees. Then he was gone. The pup stepped forward and laid down at Daniel's feet. He knelt, smiled, and whispered, "Guess I'm not done raising wild things yet." He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know where Shadow really came from or what else lived in the forest. But he knew one thing for sure. Some creatures don't just show up by accident. Some find you when you need them most. And even if they're not dogs, they're still family.